Hi everyone, this is Perrine Toledano from the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment, CCSI. There I'm leading the extractive industry workstream of the center. Thank you for being with me for this hangout. I will address a few questions that were asked following the sessions given by Brian Land on fiscal regimes. The first question that I will address is as follows: why prices are not affected by the quantity of minerals in the ground? So this is a tricky question that has several aspects that we should clarify. The first aspect is, I think, something that Brian explained in his class, which is the difference between resources and reserves. So in the question, the question refers to the quantity of minerals in the ground, but this concept deserves some clarification because it can refer to either resources or reserves. And these are two different concepts. Resources are a geological concept and reserves are an economic concept. Reserves are the economically mineable parts of the resources. And as Brian Land explained, this portion is pretty small as compared to the total resources. So reserves are the quantity of minerals that will be extracted in a way that is economically viable based on the legal regime, the technical conditions, the processing conditions, the infrastructure in place, all that you need to be in place in order to have a commercially viable project. So the quantity of minerals that are in the ground and that are not economically viable for sure will not influence the price as a starting point. Then how is the price set? This is an equilibrium price between the supply and the demand curve. And the two curves in extractive industry generally are inelastic, meaning that a change in the demand curve will not react quickly to a change in the supply curve, and the supply curve will not react quickly to a change in the demand curve. And a small decrease in demand or in supply will lead to a big change in prices. So right now we are in a phase where demand has decreased, where supply has increased, and so prices are pretty low. So when prices are low, it means that the marginal project that will set the price on the supply curve will have a cost of production that is pretty low. If you remember that supply curve, Brian Land describes it in his class. How does it work? It's you accumulate the production of various projects from the one that has the lowest cost to the one that has the highest cost. And you accumulate this project until you cover the needs of the demand, okay? So the last project that will satisfy the demand will set the price, and the price will be high enough, just high enough, to cover the marginal cost of this project. It means that there are many projects that have a cost that is too high to be in the market and to influence this price altogether that is currently quite low. So that's the first question. Then the second question: what are the main features a fiscal regime must contain in our recent context? So what is the recent context? So first of all, there are two aspects. Prices are low, as we just said, and then there is some climate change concern. The Paris Agreement was signed and ratified. So now, and all that is related to fossil fuel reserves is somewhat at risk if we want to stay on carbon budget. Every country has to issue a commitment, individual commitment to this under this Paris Agreement, meaning that they have to commit to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So some countries might be interested in disincentivize the production and the extraction of fossil fuel and put in place a carbon tax. The other aspect is the low prices. But actually, the features of the fiscal regime that are recommendable under low prices will also help under high prices. And one of the main features that we're talking about right now is progressivity. As Brian explained, progressivity, a regime that is progressive, enables the government to receive a higher share of the project profits as the profitability of the project increases. Okay, so high prices or low cost, it means high profitability of the project. Relatively speaking, the government share in the project profits will increase. This government share is also called government tech. So, as you know, the commodity cycle, the commodity prices are cyclical, and we are in the lows, but we should come back to the highs, you know, maybe not tomorrow, but in a few years. So the fiscal regimes need to be ready today in order to collect this windfall that will happen with the increase in prices. So countries might be advised to put in place today a progressive regime with progressive taxes that will kick in only when the profitability of the project will considerably increase. But it also means that today the government shares in the decrease in prices, share in that downside risk. So the progressivity is one thing. Then the other aspect that Brian mentioned are simplicity, neutrality. These are features that should be in place whatever the conditions. Simplicity, as a reminder, this is to alleviate the burden of tax administration, the compliance cost on the side of the company. Neutrality, it means that taxes should not distort the investment decision. Progressivity, simplicity, neutrality, they will all increase the perception of predictability and stability of the fiscal regime from the investor's point of view. So the recent context of low prices might encourage us to rethink about the design of fiscal regime, but at the end of the day, these principles are all-time principles because they enable the fiscal regime to self-adjust to a change in circumstances. And this is what we want. We don't want a fiscal regime to be pro-cyclical. We don't want a fiscal regime to change each time that prices change. Okay, that was the second question. The third question, what are the real challenges of the financial systems faced by oil and gas producing countries? So these questions is a question that can be addressed from the point of view of fiscal regime design, but also from the point of view of revenue management. So the revenue management part, I will leave it to the hangout that relates to the session on revenue management. From a fiscal point of view, so of course, as we discussed, prices are low. So oil and gas producing countries will get less out of the production that is already in extraction. I mean, the projects that are already in extraction, but they might also witness a delay in the decision on the part of the investors to invest in their reserves, in particular for the reserves that are very high cost. So all that is deep water, for instance, is much higher cost than what is onshore or shallow water. So that's these are the challenges that we can mention from the point of view of fiscal regime design. The other thing, thinking about this question and the first question on the features of, or the second question, the feature of a fiscal regime in our recent context, the other thing that we could put in place in order to improve the flexibility of the fiscal regime and the self-adjustment to a change in circumstances is the drafting of periodic review clauses. In a periodic review clause, parties will meet every 5 years, for instance, to review the equilibrium of the contract. And if the equilibrium has changed in a way that is too negative for one of the parties, then parties might want to renegotiate. There are several ways to write this provision, several more or less efficient way, enforceable way. We wrote at CCSI a brief on this that is available on our website, and it might be of good guidance. There is another question regarding Zambia. What was the cause of Zambia's diminishing returns on public funds and outright losses in its copper mines? It's also a question that relates to revenue management issues. Zambia hasn't managed to put in place a windfall profit tax in 2008, 2009. They tried and they repealed it. So the regime remained regressive, meaning that the government share in the project profit hasn't increased in times of high prices. So of course, in terms of low prices, the return for the treasury are lower, but that's normal. The problem is that in high prices, they haven't benefited from the windfall as they could have done in order to save money for the bust time, for the times where prices are lower, and there is a need to sustain the economy in order for the economy not to feel the commodity cycle, not to suffer from it. So Zambia hasn't adopted the best strategy in order to help the country in escaping from the cycle of the commodity prices. But that's an example that the hangout on revenue management can dive into and explain a little bit more in detail. The last question on, so it's a long question, This is about, so maybe I'm trying to catch the words that will summarize the question. There are cases in which countries try to expand the tax burden on the extractive sector in order to lower the tax burden to non-extractive industries. And by doing so, they try to create better conditions for development of the manufacturing sector. Do you think it is a good way to transfer resources between sectors? How would you compare this type of strategy with more traditional way of supporting diversification in the economy when revenue from extractive industries enters non-resource sector via public spending and public investment? What are the challenges of introducing the tax regime for extractive that is meant to support development of other industries? How can you describe the relationship between tax regime for extractives and local content norms? Okay, so that's about the trade-offs between tax receipts and diversification strategy, if any, how to leverage a fiscal regime to diversify more. It's a pretty tricky question. So here I would say, so first of all, increasing the taxes on the extractive sector in times of low prices is not the best idea. However, putting in place a progressive regime with taxes that will kick in, not today in times of low prices, but in a few years down the road when prices are high again, is a good policy in order not to suffocate the mining sector today, but still ensuring that the government will get its fair share whenever we are in the highs of the commodity cycle again. So why is the extractive? Why do governments generally levy more money on the extractive sector than on the other sectors? So in the extractive sector, there is this high perspective, high potential for rent. As Brian Land explained, the rent is the revenues that are above the cost that are necessary to incur in order to operate the project, and in addition, the minimum returns that investors require in order to invest in the project. So when there is profit above cost plus minimum return to incentivize the investment, we are in the presence of rent. It's like a super profit. It's a bonus above what is necessary to ensure that the project will continue producing. This rent, fiscal regimes try to capture it, and this rent doesn't necessarily exist in other sectors like the manufacturing sector. So that's why generally the mining sector necessitates a fiscal regime that is specific to the sector. So you can adopt a few you are faced, as a government, we are faced with a few options when you want to industrialize the country and diversify it. You can leverage the extractive industry sector to develop the supply chain, to go downstream, to develop infrastructure. This is all necessary, but the higher the costs, the higher the the more onerous these requests are on the companies, the more it is problematic for their bottom line, the more it is far away from the bottom line, the more it is far away from the existing potential of the country, the more they will ask for tax concession, tax waivers, tax incentives in order to compensate for this high cost request. So strategically, a country should try to identify the synergies with the companies, trying to find how a company could contribute to the development of the host community and the host country without compromising its bottom line. So requesting shared use of the infrastructure when it makes sense, imposing local content requirements that are in line with the potential capacity of the country, not in a way that is completely disconnected from the present and future capabilities of the workforce and supply chain. Going downstream, same thing. You can think about going downstream if you have the right skill in your workforce, if you have the right access to infrastructure, because generally downstream projects require a lot of access to water or electricity. If you have a cost of doing business that is low, if you have the right preconditions in place in order for the downstream project to make economic sense, given that downstream projects generally don't beneficiate from high margins and are highly capital intensive. So if your request on the company is out of mark, they will just ask for they will ask you to waive the royalty or to give a long tax holiday. So that's a trade-off that you need to consider. And for this projects that do not seem that it doesn't seem sensible to ask the companies to embark on them, and if this is really the public policy choice of the country, you might decide not to give up on tax receipts, not to request that from the companies, but to invest yourself this public money in this type of industrial policy. You need to be cautious here to make sure that you have run your cost-benefit analysis and to make sure that you're not going into white elephants, but into projects that make sense for the country. And this is once again a topic that the session on revenue management and investing will tackle. Okay, there is a question that I didn't quite understand, but it refers to something like, what is the most efficient way between contract and licenses? So just to clarify, in case there is misunderstanding behind this question, contracts and licenses are not, are two things to compare with the specific background in mind that I will explain. Licenses are kinds of permits that you will grant under a legal framework that regulates the relationship between the mining sector and the government, where the legal framework is the laws are the main instrument that govern this relationship. Everything will be codified in the law. The law will be long, developed, thorough, and licenses will just be an application a permit that will be issued under the law. Contracts, and I think this is something that you saw in the previous MOOC and Hangout for legal framework. Contracts are something that are a special legal instrument that either complement or supersede the legal framework. They are used when the legal framework is incomplete, and sometimes the legal framework is so incomplete or ill-designed that contracts can sit outside of the law and supersede the law. And in this case, the contract becomes the main legal instrument that regulates the relationship between the mining company and the government. Given the difficulty to negotiate contracts, ideally, the difficulty in negotiating contracts, to administer contracts, to make them transparent, ideally, best is to have a robust legal framework that governs the relationship between the investor and the government. So I think we went over all the questions. I'm available over email for additional questions and answers. I hope it was helpful. Thank you very much. And I hope you will appreciate my MOOC session on the shared use of infrastructure as well. Thank you.